Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Now let's meet our final guest this morning. Homeless at 13, in care at 14 and pregnant by 15, the odds of Deborah Somorin achieving success were severely stacked against her. But now she's a chartered accountant and has established a charity, Empower the Family, which helps those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Deborah, you have a truly inspirational story of triumph over adversity, but I'd like you to start the interview by taking us back to your childhood and a series of events which unfolded in your early teens.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I sort of had a pretty pretty normal upbringing, and my parents split up when I was about 9, 10, and my mum went through some difficult mental health issues in the lead up to their breakup and afterwards, and eventually just became unsafe for me to keep living with my mum. So I started going into care when I was about 11, and I was kind of in and out of care for a couple of years, and that's how I ended up living in the first homeless hostel when I was 13, and that in particular was a nighttime only hostel. And to give you a bit of context on what that is, essentially on a night-by-night basis. So the bed that you wake up in that morning is not the bed that you're necessarily going to sleep in that night. You have to leave the hostel first thing in the morning. Where you go during the day, like, nobody particularly cares. But in the evening then you ring around each of the hostels to try and get a bed then that evening. So I would have stayed in the nighttime only part, and then altogether homeless hostels for over 9 months in Dublin. And then I would have moved in somewhere a bit more stable when I was 14, got pregnant. I had to kind of navigate that within the confines of being in care and the challenges that came with.
So looking at those events, homeless at the age of 13, in care at the age of 14, becoming a mother and motherless at 15, to now becoming a chartered accountant and founder of a charity, where did this determination and self-belief actually come from?
Yeah, I think that for me, there's definitely an element of having a lot of people who supported me, which is quite key, particularly at the right times. So for, first instance, given that example of being in homeless accommodation, when I was going through that situation, I didn't want to go to school. It wasn't a nice environment for me to be in when there was so little going on in my life, and you're going to school and everyone's talking about their nice holidays with their friends or all the million Christmas presents that they're getting, and your home situation doesn't match that. So I didn't really want to be in school, but I got an incredible education support worker, and she set up a star chart system with me. So if I went to school every day for 3 months, I got a piece of my favourite makeup at the end. And it's things that are really small like that made a huge difference in terms of me not dropping out of school. And by the time I was ready to I suppose, really focus on school when I had my son, thankfully there wasn't this big gap in my education. So for a lot of kids in care, a lot of the care homes I grew up in, I was the only kid there that was going to school. And that's because when things are so turbulent like that, people stop going to school, and by the time they find something that's a lot more stable, they've missed so much school that they then need to do like a outreach course or something like that. That was what people did. So I'm quite lucky in that at the right time, people came into my life and found unique ways to keep me engaged in education. And then obviously having my son was huge for me in terms of that focus then being my own, in terms of I wanted a stable job, and accounting was a stable job. And if I wanted that job, I needed to do my junior cert, do my leaving cert, get a degree, get a master's. So those were kind of the steps and the goals that I was focused on, as opposed to, you don't really think about what you're doing until you're at the other side of it, until you're actually done. You've done all your exams and everything. Do you stop and go, Jesus, how did I do all of that? But at the time, you're kind of just putting goals in front of yourself, and you're looking for the people around you to support you and kind of believe that you're able to do it as well. So yeah, it's kind of a combination of those two things.
Deborah, I think there's great credit due to you for someone at such a young age and surrounded by so many challenges at the time to take that leap of faith and re-enter education. And for you, of course, seeing that education was the ultimate route out of poverty. I often speak to adults and they tell me that they're too busy to go back to education. There's just 12% of adults in Ireland engaged in lifelong learning, where we compare that to countries like Switzerland, which are over 30%. support of adults engaged in lifelong learning. For anyone listening this morning that has considered it but have put lots of excuses in the way of engaging in it, what would you say to them?
Education is one of these things where you have to focus on the goal at the end of it, right? I can tell you now, there was a number of different times when I was getting my degree where it was incredibly hard balancing that with living on my own with a young baby and parenting alone. That's difficult for people who are doing that full time, right? So never mind having to put a full-time course on top of that and all of the late nights and reading weeks and things like that come with that. But I think that it's focusing on what you want to get out of it. So I knew that for me, if I wanted to be able to be financially independent and be able to look after my son in the way that I wanted to be able to look after him and make sure he had this like normal upbringing, I needed to get that education. Like that was really crucial to me. So I think that it's really important to think about what is the end goal. And for some other people, I know I have some friends who have, completely stopped their careers, gone back to college and completely gone into a new career. So I think it's just focusing on also what makes you happy, right? So there's the goal-orientated part of it, but also if you're not working in an area that you're happy or fulfilled in, that's where education also gives you an opportunity to change that situation and go into something that makes you happier. So I think it's just about thinking about what you want to get out of it, because education for education's sake, it gets boring, right? So I think it's just about making sure that you're committed to what you want to get out of it.
It's great advice, and as I mentioned, having qualified as a chartered accountant, many might say that you would already beat the odds, but not content with that achievement, you wanted to give back. Why was the establishment of Empower the Family so very important to you?
Well, very simply, I suppose, as a solution there, like people kept coming to me when I came out my story, kind of making it seem like this was an avenue that was open to anyone who got pregnant when they were quite young. I didn't like that narrative because it wasn't that easy. It's incredibly difficult for people who are single parents. It's incredibly difficult for young people coming out of state care. It's incredibly difficult for people from disadvantaged backgrounds in general to be able to go on to college. And there's a number of barriers that are there. For example, housing and childcare is another huge one, right? So not everyone is in a position, and I had to fight for a lot of the supports that I needed in order to be able to get through my education. And in certain ways, I got lucky in that I fought for it and I went to the right person at the right time. I never actually set out to set up a charity. I set out to actually surface all of the research that was there in terms of how hard this was, get a lot of support for a solution that I could hand over to the Department of Housing to say, here, this is all the research about why you should create student accommodation for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. This is why this is needed. This is why they need additional childcare support in order to get through their degree. And there's a lot of research there even in terms of geographical areas where there's ridiculously low educational attainment areas. And on the other side of the same city, you have 3 times the level of educational attainment because there's better support services, or, the level of family support is higher. So for me, with Empower the Family, it was important to do it because nobody else would do it. Once we put all of our research together, it became quite clear that if we wanted to create this type of accommodation, we needed to do it ourselves, right? So we would have teamed up with Dublin City Council and we became an approved housing body, and that's what we've been trying to do. Is we've done a lot of work trying to secure a site in Ballymun. We've gotten a lot of pro bono support to put together a planning pack for that site in Ballymun. So that's what we're working towards now, is delivering that first development in Ballymun, or potentially teaming up at one of the universities if we could, because there was a new fund launched by Simon Harris actually recently in DCU itself. So how do we team up with those universities, if possible, to make sure that those student accommodation buildings that are being put up are sustainable and are able to support people from poorer backgrounds? And just one quick example on that is, if you're from, for example, if you're someone coming out of care, or if you're a single mom, you can't move out in the summer. There's nowhere for you to go. And you can't take a lottery that there'll be somewhere for you in September for you to move back into. You need stable accommodation for the duration of your degree. You need access to childcare. So how do we make sure that those types of support services are put in place so that it's actually sustainable for people to complete their degree? So there's a number of different things that we're looking at there, but that's why it was important to me, because we just need to make sure that these solutions actually are able to support people from poor backgrounds, not just people from more affluent backgrounds who have that level of family support that they can rely on where possible.
And Deborah, what results has the charity delivered to date?
So we secured about $750,000 of pro bono support from incredible companies like Linesight to actually put together this planning pack. We've been working with Dublin City Council to secure that site in Ballymun for the last couple of years, and that's what we're hoping to really kind of progress on in the next year, is actually securing that site and being able to get on site and start developing it for our first 34-bed unit development. So that will be 20 apartments for single parents from single parents who are in third level education, and then 14 apartments for young people coming out of state care who are also in third level education, with a creche and with a community centre for people in the area as well. So that would just be our first pilot location. We want to do more all around the country, and really anywhere that has a university should have accommodation for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the reason we're focusing on single parents and young people coming out of state care is just a prioritisation approach, because they're most at risk of homelessness. So you have people who are in those demographics who are in colleges right now who are living in homeless accommodation because they can't actually afford to have anywhere to live. So we want to try and meet that need in terms of people who need it the most first, and then we'd love to just expand that wider into people who are just from generally disadvantaged backgrounds who are having difficulty being able to secure accommodation or having financial difficulty in some way, and that this would ensure that they're able to complete the full duration of their degree.
What proactive steps could employers take to help those from disadvantaged backgrounds?
I think it is like even working with the universities and the access programs in particular. So the access program is a specific program to support people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get into university. So those programs are already doing. I was part of one when I was in school, and that was close to in my school, which is close to DCU. They're already doing the work in the disadvantaged schools to kind of increase that motivation, increase that educational attainment, I suppose, aspiration, and that's there for people in disadvantaged schools. So working more closely with them, for example, with like offering mentoring programs or offering to have people into the office for the day to actually show them what it would be like if they came in to work for them. Things like that make a huge difference in terms of changing someone's perception of what is attainable for them. So I think there's things like that where they can look to partner with those access programs that are in their localities and try to understand how they could support them to increase the motivation levels that are there for people from disadvantaged backgrounds.
And to those that are experiencing difficult times in their life right now, what advice have you got for them?
I think generally, like for me, what I try to remember is that like everything happens for a reason. I know that's really weird for me to be able to say after all of the difficult things that I've experienced, but all of those things made me who I am today. And staying focused on the fact that there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Like, tough times don't last. No one has tough times for the entire duration of their life. There's going to be moments of light there. So trying to focus on those moments of light, and where possible, trying to take control for creating those moments of light in your life. And the example that I would give is with me. If I hadn't taken control of the one thing I could control, which was my education, I was like 14, 15, I'd be in a very different economic and living situation right now. So sometimes you have to just try and think about what can I do to create moments of light in my own life, then also trying to be assured by the fact that things happen for a reason, and there's always kind of a lesson that comes out of tough times. That's what I've learned from the experiences that I've had.
You are undoubtedly an inspiration to many men and women around Ireland, and as an example of how hard work and perseverance can pay off. But who are the women that have inspired you along the way?
Oh God, so many. I don't want to be like stereotypical and say like Oprahs and the Beyoncés of the world, but these were women who, for both of them, obviously they're incredible superstars now, but they all started off as being women who were kind of leaders before their time, if that makes sense. Like with Oprah and her talk show, she was an outlier from a very young age. She was someone she came from quite difficult circumstances and pushed through all of that to try and achieve something that was really impactful and tried to help people along the way. So there's people like that who really inspire me. And then there's an incredible woman who is actually someone I've known since when I was 14, called Cherie de Berg, who passed away a number of years ago, but she supported me for years, and she was selfless. She worked for One Family, which is a counselling service for single parents, and she was incredible. She was also a single mom herself, and frequently when I found it difficult getting through college, she would share her own stories of when she was young and parenting her son and how she overcame different things. So she constantly inspired me and definitely inspired me to want to help people more, So yeah, there's that seems like such a wide reach, but it's just people women who have given and been very kind with their time and been very impactful with what they've set out to do, have definitely inspired me.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was the inspirational Deborah Somorin from Empower the Family, and I've no doubt that this incredible woman will continue to be successful throughout her life.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South